Jake had always been a heavy sleeper. Working 12-hour shifts at the tech company downtown meant he could sleep through almost anything: fire trucks, construction noise, even his upstairs neighbor's loud music at midnight. But the sound that woke him up at 2:47 a.m. was different. It was like someone had dropped a bowling ball on his bed, followed by what sounded like electrical sparks crackling in the air. His small apartment was dark except for the green glow of his digital clock. Jake rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly, thinking maybe he'd been dreaming. That's when he heard it again, a woman's voice, speaking with an accent he couldn't quite place. She sounded frustrated, like someone trying to fix a broken phone. Bloody brilliant, the voice muttered. The calculations were completely wrong. This is what happens when you rush temporal experiments. Jake's heart started beating faster. There was definitely someone in his apartment, someone who shouldn't be there. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, but his hand froze when he saw her. A woman was sitting on the edge of his bed, completely tangled up in his sheets. Her dark hair was messy, like she'd just been through a windstorm. She was wearing clothes that looked strange, not exactly old-fashioned, but not modern either. The fabric seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light, almost like it was made of some material he'd never seen before. She was holding his bedside lamp, turning it over in her hands like she'd never seen one before. Her fingers traced the power cord with genuine curiosity, as if electrical wires were some kind of ancient artifact. Fascinating. She whispered to herself. They were still using copper conductors in this era. Jake cleared his throat nervously. Excuse me. The woman looked up at him with bright, intelligent eyes. She didn't seem scared or embarrassed about being caught in a stranger's bedroom. Instead, she smiled like they were old friends meeting. For coffee? Oh, hello there, she said cheerfully. Her accent was definitely British, but there was something else mixed in. Maybe Australian? Terribly sorry about barging in like this. I don't suppose you could tell me what year it is? And perhaps what city? Jake stared at her, wondering if he was still asleep. It's 2025. Seattle. Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone? The woman's face lit up with relief. Perfect. Well, not perfect. I was aiming for the university campus, not someone's bedroom. But at least I got the right time period. She started untangling herself from his sheets with surprising grace. I'm Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez, by the way, theoretical physicist specializing in temporal mechanics. Temporal what now? Jake asked, still not entirely convinced this wasn't an elaborate dream. Time travel, essentially, Eleanor said casually, as if she just told him she worked at the grocery store. Though that's a rather simplified way of putting it. What I actually do is study the mathematical properties of chronospatial displacement. Using controlled quantum tunneling. Jake blinked slowly. Right? Time travel. Of course. Eleanor finally freed herself from the sheets and stood up. She was shorter than he'd expected, maybe 5 feet 4 inches. But she carried herself with the confidence of someone much taller. She walked over to his window and pulled back the curtain, looking out at the city lights below. Seattle in 2025, she said thoughtfully. I've read about this period in the historical archives. This was right around when humanity started taking climate change seriously. And wasn't this the year they finally figured out how to make electric cars affordable for everyone? Historical archives, Jake repeated weakly. Eleanor turned back to him with an apologetic smile. Oh, right. I should probably explain. I'm from the year 2157, about 132 years in your future. I was conducting an experiment with micro-wormholes when something went terribly wrong, and I ended up here, in your bed, specifically, which is rather embarrassing. Jake looked around his messy studio apartment, the pile of dirty laundry in the corner, the empty pizza boxes on his desk, the stack of programming books he kept meaning to read. It was the last place he'd expect a time traveler to end up. Why my bed? He asked. That's an excellent question, Eleanor said, pulling out what looked like a very sophisticated smartphone crossed with a compass. The device was glowing softly and making quiet beeping sounds, according to my temporal scanner. This location has some very unusual quantum properties. It's what we call a stability point, a place where the fabric of space-time is particularly strong. She walked around his small apartment, holding the device up and watching as the lights on it changed colors. When she got near his computer desk, it started beeping faster. "Interesting," she murmured. "The quantum field seems to be centered around your workspace. What do you do for a living?" "I'm a software developer," Jake said, feeling slightly ridiculous, having this conversation with someone who claimed to be from the future. "I write code for mobile apps." Elena's eyebrows shot up. "You work with information systems?" "That actually makes perfect sense. In my time, we've learned that people who work with complex data patterns often have a natural affinity for temporal mechanics. Their brains are already wired to think in terms of cause and effect across multiple variables." She sat down at his desk and examined his computer setup with obvious interest. His 3 monitors, mechanical keyboard, and custom-built PC suddenly looked primitive under her scrutiny. "Remarkable," she said, running her fingers along his keyboard. "These input devices are so charmingly mechanical. In my era, we interface directly with computers through neural links, much faster. But you lose the tactile satisfaction of physically pressing keys." Jake was starting to believe her story, mainly because she seemed to know things about technology that felt just slightly beyond what currently existed. Plus, there was something about the way she moved and spoke that felt genuinely foreign, like someone from a different culture trying to blend in. "So," he said carefully, "if you're really from the future, how do you get back?" Elena's confident expression faltered for the first time. She held up the glowing device in her hands, and Jake could see that part of its surface was dark and lifeless. "That's the problem," she admitted. "This is my temporal anchor device. It's what allows me to navigate through time safely. But when the displacement went wrong, it got damaged. Several key components were scattered across different time periods." She touched the dark section of the device gently, like someone examining a broken watch. "Without all the pieces, I can't generate a stable wormhole to return home. I'm essentially stranded here until I can track down the missing components and repair the device." Jake looked at this strange woman who had literally fallen into his life from the future. She was brilliant, confident, and completely out of place in his ordinary world. Any reasonable person would call the police or assume she was having some kind of mental breakdown. Instead, he found himself asking, "What can I do to help?" Elena looked up at him with surprise and genuine gratitude. "You'd really help me?" "Even though this all sounds completely mad," Jake shrugged. "My life was getting pretty boring anyway. Besides, if you really are from the future, this is probably the most interesting thing that'll ever happen to me." Elena smiled, not the polite smile she'd been giving him, but a real one that made her whole face light up. "In that case, mate, we'd better get started. I have a feeling this is going to be quite an adventure." As Jake looked at this remarkable woman who had crashed into his life through a hole in time itself, he had no idea just how right she was going to be. Jake barely slept after Elena's explanation. Every time he closed his eyes, he kept thinking about wormholes and time travel and the impossible woman now sleeping on his couch. When his alarm went off at 7 in the morning, he found her already awake, sitting cross-legged on his living room floor with strange devices spread out around her like some kind of futuristic garage sale. "Good morning," she said brightly, as if having a time traveler in his apartment was the most normal thing in the world. "I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed some of your household items for a quick analysis." Jake looked around and saw his toaster, microwave, and coffee maker had been partially taken apart. Wires and circuit boards were scattered across his coffee table, along with tools that definitely hadn't come from his kitchen drawer. "Please tell me you can put those back together," he said, walking toward his kitchen. "I really need coffee right now." "Actually, about that," Elena said, holding up what looked like a small metal cylinder with blinking lights. "Your coffee maker was absolutely fascinating. The heating element design was so charmingly inefficient that I couldn't resist." Making a few improvements, Jake stopped in his tracks. His coffee maker, which had been making weak, lukewarm coffee for the past 2 years, was now humming quietly and producing the most amazing smell he'd ever experienced. Rich, perfect coffee was dripping into the pot, and steam was rising from it like something from a commercial. "You fixed my coffee maker?" he asked in amazement. "Fixed is putting it mildly," Elena said proudly. "I upgraded the heating system using principles that won't be discovered in your time for another 30 years. That coffee is now being brewed at the exact optimal temperature and pressure for maximum flavor extraction." Jake poured himself a cup and took a sip. It was the best coffee he'd ever tasted in his life. Smooth, rich, and somehow perfectly balanced between bitter and sweet. "This is incredible," he said. "How did you do this?" Elena stood up and dusted off her hands. "Elementary quantum thermodynamics, really. In my time, we learned that most of your era's appliances were operating at maybe 20% efficiency. A few simple modifications using micro-energy fields can improve their performance dramatically." She walked over to his microwave and pressed a few buttons. Instead of the usual loud humming and rattling, it operated in complete silence while somehow heating food faster than before. The microwave was even easier. She continued. "I just recalibrated the wave frequency to target water molecules more precisely. It'll now heat your food evenly without any cold spots, and it uses about half the electricity." Jake sat down at his small kitchen table, still trying to process everything. "Okay, so you're definitely from the future. Nobody in 2025 knows how to do stuff like this." Elena joined him at the table, pulling out a piece of bread from his cabinet and putting it in the toaster. When it popped up 30 seconds later, it was perfectly golden brown on both sides. "The thing is," she said, spreading some jam on the toast, "I'm not supposed to be sharing future technology with people from your time period. There are very strict rules about temporal contamination. But given that I'm stranded here and need your help, I figured a few small improvements to your appliances wouldn't hurt the timeline." She took a bite of toast and continued talking. "The real problem is finding the missing pieces of my temporal anchor device. I managed to track their quantum signatures last night, and the good news is they're all somewhere in this city. The bad news is they're scattered across different locations, and some of them might be in places that are difficult to access." Jake leaned forward, interested despite himself. "What kind of places?" Elena pulled out her scanning device and showed him a three-dimensional map of Seattle that appeared to be floating just above the surface. Little red dots were blinking in various locations around the city. "Well, one piece seems to be embedded in the wall of an electronics shop on Capitol Hill," she said, pointing to one of the dots. "That one should be relatively easy to retrieve. Another one appears to be underwater at the aquarium, which could be more challenging." She swiped her finger across the holographic display, and the map zoomed in on different areas. "There's one in the University District, probably somewhere in the physics building. And this one here," she pointed to a dot near the city center, "seems to be about 600 feet off the ground." 600 feet, Jake asked. "That's like the Space Needle height." "Exactly," Elena said with a grimace. "Somehow one of my device components ended up at the top of your most famous landmark. I have no idea how we're going to retrieve that one without causing a scene." Jake found himself getting caught up in the puzzle. "Maybe we could pose as maintenance workers or tourists with some kind of special equipment." Elena looked at him with renewed interest. "You know, that's not a bad idea. In my experience, people in your time period tend to ignore anyone wearing a uniform and carrying official-looking equipment." She stood up and began pacing around his small kitchen, obviously thinking hard. "The key is going to be timing and preparation. Each piece of the device gives off a unique energy signature, but only when the others are nearby. As we collect more pieces, it'll become easier to locate the remaining ones." "How long do we have?" Jake asked. Elena's expression grew more serious. "That's the concerning part. The temporal displacement that brought me here created what we call a causality bubble. Essentially, reality is trying to correct itself by erasing the changes I've made to the timeline. If I don't return to my proper time within about a week, the bubble will collapse." "What happens if it collapses?" "Best case scenario, I simply fade out of existence." And none of this ever happened from your perspective. Worst case scenario? The temporal shock could create a paradox that affects your entire timeline. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. So we're not just trying to get you home. We're trying to prevent some kind of time disaster. Precisely, Elena said. But then she smiled reassuringly. Though I should mention that in all my years of studying temporal mechanics, I've never heard of a causality bubble actually collapsing. The universe has a remarkable ability to maintain stability, even when people like me go mucking about with the timeline. She sat back down and pulled out what looked like a notebook, except the pages seemed to be made of some kind of flexible glass that displayed text and diagrams. I've been working on a plan, she said, showing him pages filled with complex equations and sketches of the city. If we're systematic about this, we should be able to collect all the pieces within 3 or 4 days. The tricky part will be avoiding detection by your local authorities. Why would they care? Jake asked. Elena pointed to her scanning device. Because each piece of my temporal anchor is giving off energy readings that don't exist in your time period. If anyone with the right equipment detects them, it could raise some very uncomfortable questions about where this technology came from. She closed the notebook and looked directly at him. Which brings me to something important I need to tell you. The reason my displacement device malfunctioned wasn't entirely accidental. Someone from my time period has been making unauthorized trips to your era. My job was to investigate these temporal violations and stop whoever was responsible. Jake felt his stomach drop. So there's another time traveler here? Someone who's not supposed to be. That's what I was trying to find out when everything went wrong. Elena said, the ironic thing is that now I've become the exact kind of temporal anomaly I was sent here to investigate. But I'm starting to think that might not be a coincidence. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline in the morning light. There's something else, she said quietly. The quantum readings I'm getting from this apartment, from you specifically, are unlike anything I've ever seen. It's almost like you were meant to be involved in this somehow. Jake joined her at the window. What do you mean? Elena turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked uncertain. I mean that out of all the billions of people in your time period, and all the millions of possible locations in this city, I ended up in your bed. That level of precision suggests this wasn't random at all. The morning sun was streaming through the window, and Jake realized that his ordinary life had just become anything but ordinary. He was standing in his kitchen with a brilliant woman from the future, planning a treasure hunt across Seattle to collect pieces of broken time travel technology, while potentially being hunted by another time traveler with unknown motives. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Jake found himself more excited than he'd been in years. So, he said, finishing his impossibly perfect cup of coffee, where do we start? Jake called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. He felt bad about lying to his boss, but helping a time traveler collect scattered pieces of futuristic technology didn't seem like an excuse that would go over well. Instead, he told them he had food poisoning, which wasn't entirely false considering how his stomach felt every time he thought about what they were about to do. Elena had spent the morning studying maps of Seattle and creating what she called a temporal retrieval strategy. She borrowed his laptop and somehow connected her futuristic devices to it, turning his regular computer into something that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. The first piece should be the easiest, she explained, pointing to a location on Capitol Hill. It's embedded in the wall of a vintage electronics shop called Retro Tech Revival. The quantum signature suggests it's about 3 feet off the ground, probably lodged inside the brick wall behind some shelving. Jake looked at the address. I know that place. Old guy named Chen runs it. He's been there for like 30 years, really nice, but kind of eccentric. He collects old radios and televisions from the 1950s. Perfect. Elena said, people who work with vintage electronics are usually pretty understanding about weird electrical phenomena. He's probably already noticed that something strange is affecting his equipment. They took the bus to Capitol Hill, and Elena spent the entire ride staring out the window like a tourist. She kept pointing out things that seemed perfectly normal to Jake but apparently fascinated her. "Look at all those electric vehicles," she said excitedly. "In my time, we study this period as the Great Transportation Transition. This is when humanity finally started moving away from fossil fuels on a large scale." Jake looked around and saw the usual mix of cars, electric vehicles, and a few old gas-powered trucks. "We still have a long way to go. Oh, you have no idea how much progress you're about to make," Elena said with a knowing smile. "The next 10 years are going to be absolutely remarkable for technological development, though I probably shouldn't tell you too much about that." They got off the bus and walked 3 blocks to the electronics shop. The building was narrow and squeezed between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. The front window was packed with old televisions, radios, and other devices that looked like they belonged in a museum. Elena pulled out her scanner as they approached the building. The device immediately started beeping faster, and the lights on its surface shifted from blue to bright green. "Definitely here," she whispered. "The signal is very strong." They pushed open the door, setting off a small bell that announced their arrival. The inside of the shop was even more cluttered than the window display. Shelves lined every wall, packed with electronic devices from different decades. The air smelled like old electronics, and dusty vacuum tubes. An elderly Asian man emerged from behind the counter, wearing thick glasses and a cardigan that had seen better days. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "Can I help you folks?" he asked politely, though Jake noticed he kept glancing nervously at a shelf along the back wall. "We're here about the electrical interference," Elena said confidently, as if this was something they'd planned. "We heard you've been having some unusual problems with your equipment." The man's eyes widened. "You're here about the glowing thing. Thank goodness. I was starting to think I was going crazy." He led them toward the back of the shop, past rows of old television sets and radio equipment. "It showed up 3 nights ago," he explained. "Just appeared overnight, embedded right in the wall behind my vintage radio collection. It's been causing all kinds of problems." He pointed to a section of the brick wall where the mortar seemed to be glowing with a faint blue light. Several old radios on the nearby shelf were crackling with static, and one small television was displaying patterns that looked almost like geometric art. "I tried to ignore it at first," the man continued, "but it's been getting brighter every day. My customers keep asking about it, and honestly, it's starting to scare me a little." Elena approached the wall carefully, holding her scanner. The device was now beeping rapidly and flashing multiple colors. She examined the glowing spot, which was about the size of a quarter and pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "This is definitely one of the pieces," she said quietly to Jake. Then, turning to the shop owner, she spoke in her most professional voice. "Sir, what's your name?" "Chen," he replied. "I've owned this shop for 28 years, and I've never seen anything like this." "Well, Chen, you're absolutely right to be concerned," Elena said seriously. "This is a piece of experimental equipment that was accidentally displaced during a research project. It's perfectly safe, but it does need to be removed properly." She pulled out one of her futuristic tools, which looked like a combination of a screwdriver and a laser pointer. "With your permission, I'd like to extract it. The process should stop all the interference with your equipment." Chen nodded eagerly. "Please, go ahead. Anything to get my radios working normally again." Elena placed the tool against the glowing spot in the wall. There was a brief humming sound, followed by a small flash of light. The blue glow faded, and suddenly all the radios in the shop went quiet. The strange patterns on the television screen disappeared, replaced by normal static. Elena's tool now contained a small, crystalline object that pulsed with internal light. She carefully inserted it into a slot on her temporal anchor device, and Jake watched as one of the dark sections of the device came to life. "One down, 4 to go," she whispered to him. Chen was examining his radios with obvious relief. "They're working perfectly now," he said, tuning one of them to a classical music station. "The reception is actually better than it's been in months." The interference was affecting their performance, Elena explained. "You should notice an improvement in all your electronic equipment now." As they prepared to leave, Chen insisted on giving them an old portable radio as a thank you gift. It's from 1962, he said proudly. Still works perfectly. Consider it payment for solving my mysterious glowing wall problem. Elena accepted the radio graciously, though Jake noticed she studied it with the same intense curiosity she'd shown for his coffee maker. Once they were back outside, Jake felt like he could breathe normally again. That was easier than I expected, he said. Too easy, Elena replied, looking thoughtful. Chen mentioned the piece appeared 3 nights ago, which was exactly when I arrived in your apartment. That's not a coincidence. She pulled out her scanner and checked the readings for the remaining pieces. The next one is at the aquarium, and according to these readings, it's definitely underwater. This one is going to be much more challenging. As they walked toward the bus stop, Jake noticed Elena kept looking over her shoulder, as if she expected to see someone following them. Is everything okay? He asked. I'm not sure, she admitted. I keep getting readings on my scanner that suggest there's another temporal signature nearby. It's faint, but it's there. Jake felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. You mean the other time traveler? The one you were investigating? Elena nodded grimly. I think whoever brought me here might be watching us. They wanted me to find these pieces, but I don't think they wanted me to succeed in collecting them. She stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Jake, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about getting me home anymore. If someone from my time is manipulating events in your era, it could have serious consequences for both our timelines. Jake looked at this remarkable woman who had crashed into his life and turned everything upside down. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been debugging a mobile app. Now he was apparently involved in some kind of time travel conspiracy that could affect the future of humanity. So what do we do? He asked. Elena smiled, but there was determination in her eyes that Jake hadn't seen before. We do what we came here to do. We find the remaining pieces, and we figure out who's been playing games with time itself. As they boarded the bus toward the aquarium, Jake realized that their adventure was just getting started. The Seattle Aquarium was busier than Jake had expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Families with young children crowded around the touch tanks, while teenagers took selfies in front of the massive underwater viewing windows. Elena walked through the crowds like someone visiting an alien world, stopping to stare at displays that Jake had seen dozens of times. Incredible, she whispered, watching a group of sea otters playing in their habitat. In my time, we have to use virtual reality to see most of these species. Climate change and ocean pollution caused mass extinctions in the late 21st century. Jake felt a pang of sadness. What happened to them? Don't worry, Elena said quickly. Noticing his expression, humanity figures it out eventually. By my era, we've restored most of the damaged ecosystems using advanced biotechnology. But there were some difficult decades in between. Her scanner was beeping softly as they moved through the building. The sound grew stronger as they approached the jellyfish exhibit, a darkened room filled with cylindrical tanks containing dozens of translucent, glowing creatures. It's definitely in here, Elena said, checking her device. The quantum signature is very strong. They entered the jellyfish room, and Jake immediately noticed something unusual. Instead of floating randomly like they normally did, all the jellyfish in the central tank were pulsing in perfect synchronization. Their bodies lit up and dimmed in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic, like some kind of underwater light show. That's not normal, Jake said, watching visitors gathered around the tank, pointing and taking videos. Elena was studying her scanner intently. The temporal device fragment is affecting their nervous systems. Jellyfish are incredibly sensitive to electromagnetic fields, and the pieces generating energy patterns that they're responding to. A young aquarium employee in a blue uniform approached them, looking worried. Excuse me, are you two marine biologists by any chance? We've been having some really strange behavior in our jellyfish exhibit for the past few days. Elena stepped forward confidently. Actually, yes, we're researchers studying unusual electromagnetic phenomena in marine environments. We heard about your jellyfish situation and came to investigate. The employee, whose name tag read Tyler, looked relieved. Thank goodness. Nobody on our staff can figure out what's causing this. The jellyfish have been pulsing in sync for 3 days now. Our visitors love it, but our marine biologists are completely puzzled. Tyler led them to an observation area behind the main tank, where Jake could see the jellyfish even more clearly. They were beautiful and eerie at the same time, their translucent bodies creating waves of light that rippled through the water. Has anything unusual happened in the past few days? Elena asked. Any new equipment installed? Or strange objects found in the tanks? Tyler nodded eagerly. That's the weird part. 3 days ago, our cleaning crew found this strange glowing thing stuck to the bottom of the tank. We tried to remove it, but it seemed to be fused to the glass somehow. He pointed to the bottom of the tank, where Jake could see a small, bright object embedded in the glass floor. It looked similar to the piece they'd retrieved from Chen's shop, but this one was pulsing in rhythm with the jellyfish. We were planning to drain the tank to get it out, Tyler continued. But then the jellyfish started doing this synchronized swimming thing, and our visitors have been absolutely fascinated. We've had more people visit the jellyfish exhibit in the past 3 days than we usually get in a month. Elena was examining the tank carefully, holding her scanner near the glass. I think we can remove the object without disturbing your jellyfish or draining the tank. We have some specialized equipment for extracting electromagnetic anomalies from aquatic environments. Jake tried not to smile at how smoothly Elena was improvising. Tyler looked hopeful but skeptical. You can really get it out without harming the jellyfish? He asked. Absolutely, Elena said, pulling out another one of her futuristic tools. This one looked like a combination of a telescoping rod and some kind of energy device. This equipment uses targeted quantum field manipulation to safely extract foreign objects from sensitive environments. She extended the device toward the water, and Jake watched as a beam of soft blue light emerged from its tip. The light passed harmlessly through the water and focused on the glowing object. At the bottom of the tank, the jellyfish seemed to sense what was happening. They all moved away from the bottom of the tank, floating upward as if clearing a path. Tyler gasped in amazement. How are they doing that? He asked. They're responding to the energy field, Elena explained, concentrating on her work. Jellyfish are much more intelligent than most people realize. There was a brief flash of light underwater, and the glowing object detached from the bottom of the tank. It floated upward, surrounded by the blue energy beam, until Elena could guide it out of the water entirely. As soon as the object was removed, the jellyfish stopped their synchronized pulsing and returned to their normal, random floating patterns. Tyler stared in disbelief. That's incredible, he said. They're back to normal behavior. What was that thing? Elena carefully inserted the retrieved piece into her temporal anchor device, and Jake saw another dark section light up. It was a fragment of experimental equipment that was accidentally lost during a research project. It was generating electromagnetic pulses that interfered with the jellyfish nervous systems. Tyler was examining the tank, where the jellyfish now moved individually instead of in synchronized patterns. I have to admit, the synchronized swimming was pretty amazing to watch. But you're right, this is much more natural for them. As they prepared to leave, Tyler insisted on giving them complimentary annual passes to the aquarium. For solving our mystery, he said gratefully. Our marine biologists are going to be so relieved when I tell them what happened. Once they were outside the aquarium, Jake felt a mix of excitement and growing concern. 2 down, 3 to go, he said. But I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about someone else being involved in this. Elena pulled out her scanner and studied the readings. Actually, Jake, there's something I need to tell you, something I discovered while we were inside. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then continued in a lower voice. My scanner picked up traces of another temporal signature while we were in the jellyfish room. Someone else with time travel technology has been to that exact location recently. Jake felt his stomach drop. How recently? Within the past 24 hours, Elena said grimly. And there's something else. The way these device pieces are scattered around the city isn't random. They're positioned at specific locations that form a geometric pattern across Seattle. She pulled up the holographic map on her device. showing the locations where they'd found pieces and where the remaining ones were located. When connected, the points formed a perfect pentagon shape with the university at the center. This is deliberate, Elena continued. Someone wanted these pieces to be found in this exact order. At these exact locations, we're not just collecting scattered fragments of my device, we're following a carefully planned route. Jake stared at the pattern on the map. You think it's a trap. I think it's a test, Elena said thoughtfully. But I'm not sure if we're the ones being tested or if we're being used to test something else. She checked the readings for the remaining pieces. According to this, the next piece is at the University of Washington Physics Building. But Jake, there's something about that location that's bothering me. What do you mean? Elena was quiet for a moment, studying her device intently. The energy signature from the university piece is different from the others. It's much stronger, and it's generating patterns that look almost like communication signals. Communication with who? That's what worries me, Elena said, because if someone from my time period is trying to communicate with that device, it means they're not just watching us. They're actively involved in what's happening. As they walked toward the bus stop, Jake noticed Elena kept checking her scanner and looking around nervously. The excitement of their successful retrieval was being replaced by a growing sense that they were walking into something much more dangerous than they'd realized. Elena, Jake said quietly, what happens if we're wrong about this? What if collecting these pieces is exactly what this other person wants us to do? Elena stopped walking and looked at him directly. Then we might be about to make a mistake. That affects more than just my ability to get home. We might be about to change both our timelines in ways we can't predict. The afternoon sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the city. Jake realized that what had started as a simple mission to help a stranded time traveler was becoming something much more complex and potentially dangerous. But as he looked at Elena, brilliant and determined despite her growing concerns, he knew there was no turning back now. They were committed to seeing this through, whatever the consequences might be. The University of Washington campus felt different. As Jake and Elena approached the physics building that evening, the usual crowds of students had thinned out, and long shadows stretched across the walkways. Elena's scanner had been beeping more frantically with each step, and now it was practically humming with activity. The signal is incredibly strong, she said, studying the device's display. Much stronger than the other pieces, and there's definitely another temporal signature. Here, someone else with time travel technology has been in this building recently. They found the physics building's main entrance locked, but Eleanor produced what looked like a credit card made of translucent material. She slid it through the card reader, and the door clicked open immediately. Temporal access key, she explained. At Jake's surprised look, works on most electronic lock systems across multiple time periods. Very handy for field research. Inside, the building was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and distant sounds of equipment running in various labs. Elena's scanner led them down a hallway lined with offices belonging to physics professors, past classrooms filled with whiteboards covered in complex equations. Third floor, Elena said, checking her readings, the quantum physics research lab. They climbed the stairs, and Jake noticed that Elena seemed more tense with each floor they climbed. She kept checking her scanner and looking over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear behind them. The third floor was darker than the others, lit only by emergency lighting and the glow from various pieces of scientific equipment visible through laboratory windows. Elena's scanner led them to a door marked Quantum Research Lab. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, director. This is it, Elena whispered. The final piece is definitely in there. She used her temporal access key on the lab door, and they stepped inside. The room was filled with equipment that looked advanced even by Jake's standards. Computers with multiple screens, devices that hummed with energy, and what appeared to be some kind of particle accelerator running along one wall. Elena's scanner was now flashing rapidly and making urgent beeping sounds. She followed its guidance toward a large machine in the center of the room. That looked like a metal cylinder surrounded by electromagnetic coils. There, she said. pointing to a bright glow visible inside the machine. The final piece is inside the particle accelerator. But as they approached the device, Jake heard the sound of slow clapping behind them. They turned to see a man stepping out from behind one of the large computers. He was wearing clothes similar to Elena's, that same strange fabric that seemed to shift color slightly in different light. Impressive work, Elena, the man said with a slight accent that Jake couldn't place, though it took you longer than I expected to reach this point. Elena's expression hardened. Dr. Morrison, I should have known you were behind this. Dr. James Morrison, the man said with a mock bow toward Jake, theoretical physicist, temporal engineer, and Elena's former colleague from the year 2157. Jake looked between them, sensing the tension in the room. I take it you two don't get along. Morrison laughed. Oh, we get along fine. We just have very different ideas about how time travel technology should be used. Elena believes in following rules and regulations. I believe in taking advantage of the incredible opportunities that temporal displacement provides. You've been stealing discoveries from the past, Elena said accusingly, taking scientific breakthroughs from this time period and claiming them as your own in our era. Stealing is such an ugly word, Morrison replied. I prefer to think of it as accelerated knowledge transfer. Why should brilliant discoveries remain trapped in primitive time periods when they could benefit the future immediately? He gestured around the laboratory. Do you have any idea what Dr. Hoffman is working on in this very lab? She's on the verge of breakthroughs in quantum field manipulation that won't officially be discovered for another 15 years. But with a little guidance from someone who's seen the future, she could complete her work decades early. Elena stepped protectively in front of Jake. That's not how temporal mechanics works, and you know it. Changing the timeline like that creates paradoxes that could unravel causality itself. Does it? Morrison asked with a smirk. Because from my perspective, everything is working out perfectly. Your little accident that brought you here was no accident at all. I've been manipulating temporal currents to bring you to this exact moment. Jake felt a chill as he realized the implications. You caused Elena to crash land in my apartment. I needed someone to help her collect the scattered pieces of her device, Morrison explained. And you, Jake, were the perfect choice. Your natural affinity for pattern recognition and problem-solving made you ideal for the task. Elena's scanner suddenly started beeping in a different pattern, not the steady rhythm they'd grown used to, but an urgent, warning sound. Jake, she said urgently, whatever happens, stay behind me. Morrison isn't just trying to steal discoveries from your time period. He's been using temporal displacement to eliminate other researchers who might interfere with his plans. Morrison's expression grew more serious. Now that's simply untrue. I don't eliminate anyone. I simply relocate them to time periods where they can't cause problems. He pulled out a device similar to Elena's temporal anchor, but larger and more complex. Speaking of which, Elena, you served your purpose. The final piece of your device is right there in Dr. Hoffman's particle accelerator. All I need you to do is retrieve it for me. Why don't you get it yourself? Elena challenged. Because the energy field generated by that particular piece is key to your specific temporal signature, Morrison explained. Only you can safely extract it, and once I have it, I'll have everything I need to complete my collection of this era's most advanced scientific discoveries. Elena looked at the particle accelerator, then back at Morrison. And if I refuse? Morrison's device began glowing ominously. Then your young friend Jake gets to experience what the Jurassic period was like. I hear the velociraptors were quite fascinating, though not particularly friendly to time travelers. Jake felt his heart racing, but he also felt angry. This man was threatening Elena and trying to manipulate the timeline for his own benefit. Without thinking, he stepped toward one of the laboratory computers. You know, Jake said loudly, trying to get Morrison's attention. There's something you might not have considered about stealing discoveries from this time period. Morrison looked at him with amusement. Oh, and what's that? Modern research. Labs have security systems, Jake said, and quickly pressed several keys on the computer keyboard, including automatic lockdown procedures when unauthorized access is detected. Suddenly, Alarms started blaring throughout the building. Emergency lights began flashing, and Jake heard the sound of security doors locking throughout the facility. Morrison looked surprised for the first time since he'd appeared. "What did you do?" "I triggered the lab's security protocol," Jake said. "This building is now in complete lockdown. No one gets in or out until security arrives to investigate." Elena took advantage of Morrison's distraction to pull out her own temporal device. "Jake, that was brilliant, but we need to move fast. I can extract the final piece and activate my return sequence, but I'll need about 30 seconds without interference." She ran toward the particle accelerator while Morrison was still trying to understand what had happened. Jake positioned himself between Morrison and Elena. Even though he had no idea how to fight a time traveler, "You can't stop progress," Morrison called out as Elena began working on the accelerator controls. "Scientific advancement shouldn't be limited by arbitrary timelines." "Maybe not," Elena replied, her hands moving quickly over the machine's interface. "But it should be limited by ethics and the safety of the timeline itself." There was a bright flash from inside the particle accelerator, and Elena pulled out the final piece of her temporal anchor device. As soon as she inserted it into the device, all the dark sections lit up, and the entire thing began humming with energy. Morrison raised his own device, but before he could activate it, Elena's completed temporal anchor created a brilliant field of light that filled the entire laboratory. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation, like the air itself was vibrating. The device is creating a temporal stabilization field. Elena called out over the humming sound. "Morrison's equipment won't work properly while it's active." Morrison tried to activate his device anyway, but instead of the controlled displacement he'd intended, Jake saw him simply fade away like a ghost, becoming more and more transparent until he disappeared entirely. "Where did he go?" Jake asked back. "To his own time," Elena said, but she looked concerned. "Though without a properly calibrated device, he might have ended up anywhere between now and 2157. That's what happens when you try to use temporal technology irresponsibly." The security alarms were still blaring, and Jake could hear footsteps echoing through the building as campus security responded to the lockdown. Elena looked at her completed device, then at Jake. "I can go home now. The temporal anchor is fully functional, and the stabilization field will prevent any paradoxes from my presence here." She paused, studying the readings on her device. "But Jake, there's something else. The quantum entanglement between us that I mentioned earlier."